Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are attempting something, well, something difficult. We're trying to really see a person who spent her entire life making sure she couldn't be truly seen.
That is a very, very apt way to put it. We are looking at Elizabeth I.
And I think for most of us, Elizabeth I isn't really a person. She's a logo. She's that image on the tea towel, you know, the one.
The white lead makeup, the bright red wig.
The pearls, the ruffs that are the size of a satellite dish. She is Gloriana.
The Virgin Queen.
Right.
The woman who defeated the Spanish Armada and ushered in a golden age of Shakespeare and exploration. That's the brand.
Right. But the source material we're working with today, and it's a massive stack of biographical records, letters, state papers, it tells a story that is so much more desperate. It suggests that the makeup and the wigs weren't just fashion, they were armor.
It's a survival story, and that's really the mission of this deep dive. We need to strip away that fairy queen propaganda, which, we should note, she manufactured herself very successfully.
Oh, brilliantly.
And look at the political genius and the profound personal trauma that shaped her.
So the central question we're trying to answer is this. How did a woman in the 16th century, I mean, a time when women were legally property and generally expected to be silent, how did she not only survive, but become the most feared ruler in Europe?
And that other big question, was the Virgin Queen a noble sacrifice, or was it the most successful marketing campaign in political history?
To understand the Golden Age, you have to understand that it started in the mud. It started with trauma.
It absolutely did.
So let's go back to the beginning. 1533. She is born to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. She is the heir. Everything is perfect. And then she hits age 2.
2 years and 8 months, to be precise. And her world completely collapses. Her father, Henry, has her mother, Anne Boleyn, beheaded on charges of treason and adultery.
And it's not just that she loses her mother, which is obviously catastrophic. The source material really emphasizes the legal shift here.
Yeah.
Henry annuls the marriage. So Elizabeth isn't just an orphan. She is declared illegitimate. She goes from Princess Elizabeth to the Lady Elizabeth.
She is stripped of her place in the succession, and you have to consider the psychological imprint of this. I mean, she's a toddler, but she is surrounded by a household that suddenly treats her differently.
Right. The whispers must have stopped when she entered a room.
Exactly. Her clothes are outgrown and not replaced. Her governess has to write these desperate letters begging the king for funds for canvas to make the child underwear.
It's a Cinderella story, but with the constant lingering threat of execution hanging over it.
Yeah.
And then she watches her father just cycle through wives. Jane Seymour dies. Anne of Cleves is divorced. Catherine Howard.
Beheaded, just like her mother's cousin.
That is the environment. She learns very, very early that marriage is a dangerous business. For women, anyway. If you displease the king, you die.
But this is where we see her first coping mechanism develop. Since she has no power, no status, she turns to the one thing she can control.
Her mind. Education.
I was looking at the breakdown of her studies. It's not finishing school stuff. She's not just learning to sew and play the lute, you know.
Far from it. She became one of the most educated women of her generation. By her teens, she was fluent in French, Italian, Spanish, and Latin. She could read Greek.
And she wasn't reading light fiction. The sources list her translations, Tacitus and Boethius.
Let's just pause on that for a second, because that's so telling. Tacitus was a historian of the Roman Empire, specifically writing about how to survive under tyrants.
Exactly. And Boethius wrote The Consolation of Philosophy while he was in prison awaiting execution.
So you've got a teenager, the daughter of a tyrant who kills his wives, and she's translating manuals on how to survive tyranny and how to find peace in a prison cell. That feels highly practical.
It was her survival guide. She couldn't fight with a sword, so she sharpened her mind. She used her intellect to make herself useful, or at least formidable. And she would need that intellect immediately after Henry dies in 1547 because she walks right into the Seymour scandal.
Right. I want to slow down on this part, because in the movies, the Thomas Seymour incident is often played as this sort of tragic romance or a minor blip.
A teenage crush.
Yeah. But looking at the depositions in the source material, this feels like a fundamental dismantling of a child's safety. We're talking about a man in his late 30s targeting a 14-year-old girl.
It's grooming by modern definitions. But politically, it was treason. Seymour wasn't just a creep. He was the Lord High Admiral. He was the uncle of the new king, Edward VI. He was attempting to build a power base to challenge his brother, the Lord Protector.
And marrying Elizabeth was the key.
By marrying Elizabeth, he would have controlled the spare heir to the throne. It was a power play.
But here's what I don't get. Elizabeth was incredibly sharp. We just established she was translating Latin at age 10. Did she not see what he was doing? Or was she just a lonely kid who liked the attention?
And that is the absolute tragedy of it. She was both. She was an intellectual prodigy, yes, but she was also a motherless teenager living in a household where her stepmother, Catherine Parr, the woman responsible for protecting her, was actually participating in some of these boundary violations.
That's the part that's so hard to read.
To keep her husband happy. The sources mention Catherine holding Elizabeth down while Seymour cut her gown into pieces. It was a bizarre, abusive dynamic.
And when Catherine dies in childbirth, the buffer is gone. Seymour moves immediately to try and marry Elizabeth.
And that leads to the interrogation at Hatfield. This is the part that reads like a spy thriller. The Crown arrests Seymour for treason, and they send an investigator, Sir Robert Tyrwhitt, to break Elizabeth.
And he's not just asking her questions. He is actively trying to trick her.
Oh, completely. Tyrwhitt's letters are wild. He writes to the council saying, I will get it out of her. He tries everything. He tells her rumors that she's pregnant with Seymour's child.
He tells her Seymour has already confessed, which was a lie. He tries to terrify her into admitting a plot.
Imagine the pressure. You are 15. Your father beheaded your mother. Now the government is telling you that if you don't confess to this marriage plot, you're a traitor. Most adults would crack.
But she doesn't.
No. And this is where the Elizabethan character is forged. She stonewalls him. She writes these letters that are masterpieces of evasion. She admits to hearing rumors, but never admits to the actions. She parses every single word.
And Tyrwhitt eventually just gives up.
He essentially does. He writes, she hath a very good wit, and nothing is gotten of her but by great policy.
She beat the interrogator at 15.
She saved her own life. If she had admitted to a contract of marriage with Seymour without the king's consent, she would have been disinherited or, worse. It taught her the most valuable lesson of her reign. Silence is safer than speech.
That lesson comes in handy pretty quickly because her brother Edward dies young, and her older sister Mary takes the throne. Mary first. Bloody Mary.
A devout Catholic. And Elizabeth is the great Protestant hope. Even if Elizabeth does nothing, her very existence is a threat to Mary.
So when the White Rebellion breaks out in 1554 against Mary's plan to marry Philip of Spain,
Elizabeth is the natural figurehead. Whether she was involved or not, everyone assumes she was.
so Mary throws her in the Tower of London.
The very same place her mother was imprisoned before her execution, she enters through Traitor's Gate. The sources say she sat on the wet steps and refused to go in, saying, "Here lands as true a subject, being prisoner, as ever landed at these stairs." She was terrified.
I read that Mary's advisors, like the Spanish ambassador, were basically in her ear day and night saying, as long as Elizabeth lives, you will never be safe.
They wanted her head.
So why didn't Mary just execute her?
Primarily a lack of evidence. Elizabeth stuck to her training. She saw everything and said nothing. She admitted nothing. She wrote these incredibly careful letters pledging her loyalty.
And Mary knew that executing her sister without hard proof would turn Elizabeth into a Protestant martyr.
It would have caused a civil war. So Elizabeth survives by seeing and keeping silent video et taceo. It becomes her personal motto.
So flash forward to 1558. Mary Ann dies. She's childless. And suddenly, Elizabeth, the bastard, the prisoner, becomes queen at age 25.
It's a remarkable turnaround, but the country she inherits is a complete disaster zone. It's bankrupt from Mary's wars, the military is degraded, and it is violently, violently divided by religion.
And she kicks things off with this really interesting speech about her two bodies.
Right, it's a key concept. She says she has a body natural, her physical, female, human self, and a body politic, the divine, immortal institution of the monarchy.
She's basically telling them, I might be a woman, which you all think is a weakness, but I'm also God's anointed vessel, so deal with it.
It's clever rhetoric, but you're right, she has to back it up with policy.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the machinery of 1559. She becomes queen, and the country is a religious wreck. You have Catholics who think she's a heretic, and Puritans who think she's not Protestant enough.
So the history books call it the middle way. But how do you actually legislate a middle way when half your parliament wants to burn Protestants and the other half wants to smash Catholic statues?
Well, it was an absolute legislative brawl. You have to remember, the House of Lords was stacked with Catholic bishops appointed by her sister Mary. They voted against her first religious proposals unanimously. The middle way almost died on arrival.
So how did she pass it? She couldn't just execute all the bishops without looking like a tyrant.
She used a combination of procedural trickery and the Easter recess. She arrested 2 key bishops for disobedience just to get them out of the chamber and reduce the Catholic vote count.
That's a bold move.
It was. And then she split the legislation into 2 parts, the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Uniformity.
Okay, so let's parse those. The Act of Supremacy is the one about her title, right?
Yes. And this is where the genius of language comes in. The Catholics couldn't accept a woman as head of the church because that's the Pope's job, or Christ's. And the hardline Protestants, the Puritans, didn't like it either.
So she proposes Supreme Governor.
Governor. It sounds more administrative.
Less divine.
Exactly. It implies administrative control without claiming theological divinity. It gave the Catholics just enough of a loophole to swear allegiance to her without feeling like they were damning their souls.
Smart. But the Act of Uniformity, that's the one that affects the average person on Sunday morning.
Correct. And this was the great compromise. The book was Protestant, the Book of Common Prayer, but the look was Catholic-ish. She kept the priest's vestments, the candles on the altar, the choral music.
She knew that for the illiterate peasant in Yorkshire, the deep theology didn't matter as much as the sensory experience.
Right. If it looked and felt like the church they'd always known, they wouldn't revolt.
But what if you didn't go? What if you were a hardcore Catholic who refused to attend this new service?
Then you paid. This is the recusancy fine. 12 pence for every missed Sunday service.
12 pence doesn't sound like much today.
Back then, it was about a week's wages for a common laborer. It was painful, but it wasn't lethal. And that was the calculation.
She didn't want to make martyrs.
She wanted to make money and ensure outward conformity. She famously said she had no desire to make windows into men's hearts.
Basically, I don't care what you believe in your head. Just show up, pay your taxes, and don't cause trouble.
Precisely. It was about stability, not piety.
But while she's trying to stabilize the country, everyone else is obsessed with one thing. Who is she going to marry?
The marriage question. It completely dominated the first 20 years of her reign. Parliament, her council, foreign ambassadors, they all believed a woman could not rule alone. She needed a husband to handle the military and, crucially, secure this succession.
And she had options. I mean, first and foremost, there was Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester.
Her sweet Robin, the sources are pretty clear that this was a genuine emotional connection. They had known each other since they were 8 years old. They were in the Tower at the same time under Mary.
But he was married until his wife, Amy Robsart, was found dead at the bottom of a flight of stairs with a broken neck.
Which is still one of history's great cold cases. Did Dudley arrange it? Did Elizabeth know? Was it a genuine accident or suicide? We'll never know. But the optics were absolutely terrible.
If Elizabeth married him right after that, she would have been seen as an accomplice to murder. It would have been political suicide.
Total suicide. So Dudley is out. Then you have the foreign princes. Philip II of Spain proposed, which is ironic since he was her brother-in-law.
Right, the Archduke of Austria, the French dukes.
The Duke of Anjou, she called him her frog. She even wore a frog-shaped earring he sent her. It went on for years.
That is adorable. But was she ever serious? Or was she just stringing him all along?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? She played the game for decades. She called it courtship, but it was really foreign policy. As long as she was available, she could dangle the possibility of an English alliance before France or Spain.
And play them off against each other.
Exactly. But if she marries one, she alienates the other. And more importantly, she loses her power to her husband. She saw what happened to her sister Mary, who married Philip II and got dragged into Spanish wars and was completely sidelined.
She was never going to let that happen.
Never. So she pivots. She takes this liability, being unmarried and childless, and she turns it into a brand. The Virgin Queen.
It's brilliant marketing.
It is. In a country that had just lost its primary female religious figure, the Virgin Mary.
She steps into that void.
She becomes the mother of the nation. She declares she is married to her kingdom. It was a genius move that justified her holding sole power.
But while she's building this brand of the perfect Protestant queen, there is a dark reflection, a rival across the border. Mary, Queen of Scots.
The rival. You couldn't write a better foil for Elizabeth. Mary Stuart is everything Elizabeth isn't. She's younger. She was raised in the glamorous French court, so she's incredibly charming and courtly. She's devoutly Catholic. And crucially, she has a son, an heir.
And in the eyes of Catholic Europe, Elizabeth is illegitimate, the daughter of Anne Boleyn. So Mary is the rightful Queen of England.
Correct. But Mary was politically reckless. She makes disaster after disaster in Scotland. Her husband, Lord Darnley, is murdered. The house he was staying in was literally blown up, and then he was found strangled in the garden.
That is incredibly violent.
And then, just a few months later, Mary marries the main suspect, the Earl of Bothwell. Her own people turn on her. She is forced to abdicate and flee Scotland. And where does she go?
She runs to England. She throws herself on the mercy of her cousin Elizabeth, assuming Elizabeth will help her get her throne back.
Which puts Elizabeth in an absolutely impossible position. This is the ultimate damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right. She can't kill an anointed queen. That sets a terrible precedent.
She can't help her regain her throne because Mary is a Catholic with a claim to the English throne. That's a huge threat.
And she can't just let her go to France to raise an army against her.
So she puts her in a cage.
A gilded cage. For 19 years, Mary is moved from castle to castle under house arrest.
But you can't lock up a symbol. As long as Mary is alive in England, every Catholic plot against Elizabeth has a figurehead.
And there were so many plots. The Rodolphi plot, the Throckmorton plot. Then in 1570, the Pope actually excommunicates Elizabeth. He issues a bull called Regnans in Excelsis.
Can we define exactly what that meant back then? Because today, excommunication sounds like you just can't take communion.
In 1570, it was a weapon of war. It declared Elizabeth a heretic and a servant of crime. But crucially, it legally absolved all English Catholics of their allegiance to her.
It basically gave them religious permission to assassinate her.
So the Pope put a hit out on her.
Effectively, yes. So the pressure on Elizabeth to get rid of Mary becomes immense. Her spy master, Francis Walsingham, is practically begging for it. Walsingham is running this incredible surveillance state that would make the CIA jealous, intercepting letters, breaking codes, turning double agents.
And eventually he traps Mary, the Babington plot in 1586.
He intercepts letters using a double agent where Mary explicitly consents to the assassination of Elizabeth. The evidence was undeniable. He had her dead to rights.
So Elizabeth has no choice. But even then, she hesitates. The sources say she signed the death warrant, but then claims she didn't mean for it to be sent.
She blamed her secretary, William Davison. She threw him under the bus, put him in the tower. She had to maintain plausible deniability. She knew that executing a sovereign monarch was breaking a divine taboo. She was terrified that if she killed a queen, it would open the door for people to kill her. And historically, she was right. Her successor's son, Charles I, would lose his head a few decades later.
So Mary is executed in 1587. And for Philip II of Spain, this is the final straw. It's go time. The Spanish Armada.
The enterprise of England.
This is the blockbuster movie moment, 1588. Spain sends this massive fleet, the largest Europe had ever seen, to invade England, depose the heretic queen, and restore Catholicism.
And we all know the story. Elizabeth gives a speech, the plucky little English navy sets ships on fire, and the Spanish are defeated by a Protestant wind.
That is the headline. But we need to look at the logistics because the reality is much grittier. On paper, England should have been crushed. Spain was the superpower.
But England had the Sea Dogs.
Francis Drake, John Hawkins, let's be clear. These men were state-sponsored pirates.
They absolutely were. They had been raiding Spanish gold shipments for years. They were rough, they were aggressive, and they had better technology. Their ships were faster, more maneuverable, and their guns could fire further.
But the decisive moment wasn't really a gunfight, though, was it? It was the fire ships.
That was the turning point. The Spanish were anchored off Calais, waiting to pick up their invasion army. The English sacrificed 8 of their own ships, filled them with tar and gunpowder, set them ablaze, and drifted them into the tightly packed Spanish formation at night.
It must have caused absolute panic.
Complete chaos. The Spanish captains cut their anchor cables and scattered into the North Sea. Their perfect crescent formation was broken.
And then the weather took over. The Protestant wind.
A series of terrible storms battered the Spanish fleet as they tried to sail home around Scotland and Ireland. It was a disaster for Spain. Thousands drowned.
Okay, we need to talk about the Tilbury speech. I have the heart and stomach of a king. It's iconic. But the timeline in the sources is a bit messy. Did she give this speech before the battle to rally the troops?
Actually, no, and this is a detail that historians love to debate. She gave the speech to the troops at Tilbury after the Spanish Armada had already been scattered by the fireships and was being chased up the channel.
Wait, so the immediate danger had passed?
Well, they didn't know that for sure. They were still worried the Spanish might regroup and land. But yes, the speech was more of a PR victory lap than a Braveheart charge into battle. And there is a darker context to Tilbury that usually gets cut from the movie. The condition of those soldiers she was speaking to. The English Navy had won, yes, but the logistics were a disaster. The Queen's government was terrified of the cost of keeping a standing army.
So while Elizabeth was delivering this soaring rhetoric about dying for her people,
The sailors on those ships who had just saved England were literally dying of typhus and starvation in the ports because the crown wouldn't pay them or release money for food and medicine.
because she wouldn't pay them,
Because the crown was broke and the bureaucracy was paralyzed, Lord Howard of Effingham, the admiral, was actually using his own personal money to buy wine and arrowroot for his sick crewmen because the Privy Council wouldn't release the funds.
that creates a very different image.
Yeah.
You have the Queen in her white velvet and silver breastplate, looking like a goddess, while the men who actually saved the country are rotting in Margate.
It highlights the disconnect between the myth of Gloriana and the reality of the Elizabethan state. The propaganda machine was world-class. The supply chain was medieval.
And we see this again the very next year. We always stop the story at 1588. But in 1589, Elizabeth decides to push her luck. She sends the English Armada to Spain.
I assume since we never hear about the English Armada, it didn't go well.
It was a catastrophe. Led by Drake and Norris, they lost thousands of men, failed to take Lisbon, and bankrupted the treasury even further. It proved that 1588 was largely a fluke of weather and Spanish mismanagement, not proof of English military supremacy.
And this brings us to the part of her reign that often gets skipped.
Right.
The second reign, the 1590s. The sources paint this decade as really dark.
It was. The Golden Age felt very tarnished to the people living through it. You had 4 consecutive years of bad harvests. Inflation was rampant. There was plague in London. And personally, for Elizabeth, it was a time of profound loss.
Her inner circle starts dying off.
Exactly. Dudley dies in 1588, right after the Armada. Walsingham in 1590. Her rock, her chief advisor William Cecil, dies in 1598. She is suddenly an old woman surrounded by a new generation of courtiers who are young, ambitious, and frankly, tired of waiting for her to die.
And the main character of this new generation is the Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux.
Dudley's stepson. He was handsome, arrogant, reckless. Elizabeth indulged him, perhaps because he reminded her of her youth and of Dudley, or perhaps because she just needed the flattery, but he didn't respect her.
There's that famous anecdote where he turns his back on her in a Privy Council meeting.
Yes. Turning your back on the monarch is a huge, huge insult. And she lost her temper. She actually boxed his ears.
She hit him?
She hit him. And his reaction. He reached for his sword.
In front of the Queen, that's treason.
It was a shocking breach of protocol. It showed that her authority, her mystique, was slipping. Essex eventually tried to stage a rebellion in London in 1601. He marched through the streets trying to rally the people to save the Queen from her advisors.
And nobody showed up.
Nobody. The people might have been hungry and unhappy, but they were loyal to her. Essex was arrested and executed. But the betrayal broke her. She fell into a deep, deep depression.
And physically, the sources paint a really stark picture of these final years. The rainbow portrait from this time shows her looking young, beautiful, and ageless. But the reality...
The reality was brutal. She had smallpox scars from an illness back in 1562. She was losing her hair, which is why she wore those elaborate red wigs to cover it. And her teeth.
The sugar addiction.
Yes. Sugar was a luxury status symbol, and she loved it. Her teeth were black and rotting. Foreign ambassadors reported that they could barely understand her when she spoke because so many teeth were missing.
Yet she still dressed the part. The sources say she refused to look in a mirror in her final years.
That is heartbreaking. It's like she became a prisoner of her own image. She couldn't let anyone see the human being, only the Queen.
And while she is physically decaying, she is ordering a brutal campaign in Ireland, the 9 Years' War.
The source mentions scorched earth tactics.
It was a total war. To subdue the rebellion led by Hugh O'Neill, her commander Lord Mountjoy burned crops, destroyed villages, and deliberately induced a famine. Thousands of civilians died. It was a military victory. O'Neill surrendered just days after Elizabeth died. But the human cost was horrific. It's a reminder that good Queen Bess was also a ruthless war leader.
So we reach 1603. She's 69 years old. She's depressed. She's refusing to go to bed. She stood for hours and hours, or sat on cushions on the floor. Her ladies-in-waiting had to prop her up. She was afraid that if she lay down, she would never get up again. She knew the end was coming.
And Robert Cecil, the son of her old advisor, is begging her to go to bed, and she snaps at him. Must is not a word to use to princes, little man.
Even at the very end, she was the queen. She refused to name an heir until the very last moment. She knew that the moment she named James VI of Scotland, her power would flow to him. All her courtiers would turn to the rising sun.
But Cecil had been secretly negotiating with James for years, hadn't he? The silent transition. It was a masterclass in secret diplomacy. Cecil was writing to James in code, basically telling him, sit tight, don't invade, just wait, and the throne is yours. When Elizabeth finally died in the early hours of March 24, 1603, the transition was seamless. No civil war, no invasion. James VI of Scotland became James I of England.
And she was buried in Westminster Abbey. But here's the final irony. She was buried in the same tomb as her sister Mary.
The sister who tried to have her killed. The inscription reads, Consorts in realm and tomb, here we sleep. Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in hope of resurrection. The Protestant and the Catholic, the survivor and the tragic queen, trapped together for eternity.
So let's unpack the legacy. We started by asking if she was a genius or a performance artist.
And I think the answer is that she was a genius because she was a performance artist. She understood that power, especially in that era, is largely perception. She held the country together. She provided 44 years of stability after decades of chaos under her father and siblings. She forged a national identity.
But she also kicked the can down the road on a lot of issues, right? She didn't solve the religious problem, she just paused it. The Puritans didn't go away. She didn't solve the structural financial problems of the crown.
That's true. She left a lot of problems for the Stuarts to deal with. But she kept England independent and relatively peaceful in a Europe that was tearing itself apart with religious wars. At the end of the day, she held the center.
It's just amazing to think about that little girl who was declared illegitimate, who had her gown cut to pieces, who sat in the Tower of London expecting to die. She didn't just survive, she defined an entire era.
And she did it alone. She proved that a woman could rule, but the price she paid was that she could never be anything but a ruler. She sacrificed the personal for the political in a way that is almost hard to comprehend today.
So here's my final thought for you listening. We remember the Golden Age. We remember the victory, the portraits, the poetry. But when you look at the reality, the wigs covering her hair loss, the rotting teeth, the refusal to name an heir, the constant fear of assassination, was Elizabeth the master of her destiny? Or was she just the ultimate survivor of a brutal game she never asked to play?
A provocative question. Perhaps the Gloriana mask was the only thing that kept the terrified woman underneath safe.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Until next time.